Hi everyone, my name is Xandra Schlechte, and this is my final oral presentation for our Multicultural Gifted Education course. I am currently beginning my second year as a master's student in the Professional School Counseling program at UGA, and this year I will be doing an internship in an elementary school for the full year. This past spring semester, I was a practicum student at a middle school as a counseling student, and before starting this program, I did a year of service with City Year Boston, and served as a mentor and a tutor in an urban public school. So I was in a 6th grade classroom then. So that's the majority of my experience working in education. The first objective or goal from the course that I want to talk about is objective number 2, and it's recognizing prejudice and oppressive institutional structures in education that marginalize gifted students from culturally diverse backgrounds, specifically race, class, gender, and language issues. So these are some issues that within education that we discussed in my program on a larger scale, but not as specific to gifted education as we have through now the discussion boards and all the different readings and articles we've been provided. My facilitation of discussion was on Catano's article on the multicultural perspective for gifted education with culturally diverse students, and that really prompted me to realize some of the barriers that there are for culturally diverse students in gifted education. And throughout the course, I've come to see how biased assessment eligibility referrals are. And in this past, in the session 14 discussion post, I chose assessments and referral and identification practices as one of the critical components to evaluate in regards to gifted education programs, because I see how directly it relates to the underrepresentation of culturally diverse students in gifted education, and especially for low-income students who are exposed to less resources and less vocabulary and English-speaking students. A lot of these standardized assessments just cause a lot of additional barriers to these students to be able to access or achieve on, and aren't culturally relevant to many populations besides white, middle or higher income students. And so that's definitely something that I want to look at in all of the schools that I work in the future, to see how these practices, what they are in the schools and how they're affecting the students I work with. Also just realizing how teacher referrals for identification and for gifted and advanced programs can be very biased due to the biases, implicit and explicit, that we all hold. And it specifically also has caused me to think about how there are disproportionate disciplinary practices a lot in school that lead to the overrepresentation of students of color, and specifically male students of color, to receive the highest number of behavioral referrals, which can be due to the biases of the teacher, those giving the disciplinary referrals, and can also be due to lack of understanding of cultures or different cultural values, and how we perceive each other. And when these students are labeled as bad students, or constantly receiving behavioral referrals, how does that affect identification for gifted programming? Because in my own experience, like, this has caused me to reflect on my own experience in gifted education and AP programming. A lot of the students identified were those just seen as academically smart, or as good students, which a lot of times I think, at least for my schooling experience, meant quiet and respectful, and good manners and getting all A's, which doesn't necessarily translate to giftedness. And this course has caused me to reflect on my own experience a lot. I realize now how much of a lack of diversity there was both in students, and I don't think I ever had a teacher of color in any of my gifted or AP classes through elementary school all the way to high school, and just how that lack of representation can impact gifted students from culturally diverse backgrounds. And it also caused me a lot to think on how whitewashed the curriculum is both within regular education and gifted education, and how the absence of representation and instruction in curriculum can impact motivation and engagement in learning, and how the lack of a culturally responsive curriculum can also make it more difficult for culturally diverse students to achieve by not creating a safer, welcoming environment or providing opportunities to demonstrate strengths or allow the valuing of their culture to be brought into the classroom and welcomed, and how that can impact identity development, as well as self-esteem and self-efficacy, and just overall well-being. The second objective I wanted to focus on is analyzing the influence of culturally unresponsive or responsive environments on the psychological, social, and emotional development of culturally diverse students in gifted programs. And this is a topic I focused on in my position papers. My first one, I examined how, by not addressing my own white privilege, I could negatively impact the students I work with. Because if we are creating a culturally unresponsive environment, then this discrimination can negatively impact mental, emotional, and physical health. And culturally diverse students already face barriers, discrimination, and systems of oppression within education that act as daily stressors and negatively impact them. But they also have this intersection of identities with being gifted as well that can create additional barriers, especially when there's a lack of representation within the classroom and content. And this topic is one that I focused on because I feel like it's directly relevant to my role in education as a future school counselor, in creating culturally responsive environments, and as well as supporting these students to promote psychological, social, and emotional development, but also to support them when this development is negatively impacted by exposure to culturally unresponsive environments. Culturally unresponsive environments can lead us to ignore the needs of culturally diverse gifted students, and to also never identify them because we don't understand their culture or their strengths or give them the opportunity to share them. And I've realized if I don't constantly examine my own privilege and actions, then I can be committing microaggressions, and if I'm not actively working against the systems, then I'm perpetuating the systems of oppression that lead to the underachievement and underrepresentation of culturally diverse students in regular education and in gifted programs. And I believe that this lack of representation of culturally diverse students in gifted education sends a message to these students that they're not worthy or valuable, which can lead to decreased pride, self-efficacy, self-esteem, and can decrease achievement motivation. But on the other hand, if we create culturally responsive environments for students, we can empower these students and help them identify and build their skills, build their self-efficacy. And if I'm willing, I've noticed in my experiences with students that if I'm willing to examine and acknowledge my own privilege with them, then I've been able to create deeper and more authentic relationships and create space for discussion and engagement on different issues, as well as help empower students to build skills for advocacy. And then for future plans, an area of growth I have is in this past year I've been trying to engage in courageous conversations, and I've been able to do that with some friends or family members or students, but it has been harder for me to do so within the school setting, particularly because I was at my practicum site and I felt like I didn't have a lot of agency there because it's not a stable position, and I didn't have strong relationships with administrators because I was only there once a week. And also with my own cultural background, that definitely impacts my view of authority figures and how I interact with them. So I was hesitant to do so. So I want to grow in my ability to initiate these conversations with people in positions of power, and particularly using data to highlight issues of representation for culturally diverse students, and advocate for their representation in programs, and use this data as well to figure out where the sources of underrepresentation are coming from, if it's from teacher referrals, if it's from the assessments, to then identify where change needs to be made. And then the other change, an area of change for me, has been recognizing culturally diverse gifted students as a population with unique needs, and then as an opportunity as a counselor to help identify these students, and also to provide support and build skills and empower these students by helping give them coping strategies, helping build resiliency, and promote their racial identity development, help provide support in their academic identity and building academic pride and skills, and just seeing these students as, because I feel like counselors do not see gifted students as a high need population for counseling, but they experience a lot of their own mental health issues with anxiety or perfectionist tendencies, and then with the intersection of cultural diversity. I think that this is definitely an overlooked and underserved population that I want to make sure I focus on and acknowledging in my counseling work. And then in terms of networking and collaboration, some organizations I want to connect with is Teaching Tolerance. So I've been subscribed to Teaching Tolerance, and although the name might be somewhat outdated and I want to move beyond tolerance to acceptance, the organization provides free lessons and resources for both counselors and teachers to address equity issues and incorporate multicultural content. And an aspect I really like is that when there are issues or events happening in society and culture that relate to oppression and injustice, such as family separation, Teaching Tolerance will send out emails to provide tools and resources for discussion and lessons around this specific topic. So it's very useful for my role as a counselor in supporting culturally diverse students, as well as providing content for teachers to incorporate this in without adding to their workload as much. And then GSCA is the Georgia School Counseling Association. So just using this as a tool to network with other counselors and hear how they are addressing these issues within their schools. And then for individuals, I want to connect with my gifted education teachers and coordinators at my internship site to learn more about their program and identification and assessment, to understand it more, and then build a relationship to open up dialogue around representation and equity. And then with my own family and friends, because it's just as important to have courageous conversations with the people you care about and engage in these issues outside of the school environment to create change. I want to address these issues in my own relationships and in systems outside of education. So yeah, thank you.